Think about the last time you saw a chimpanzee in the wild. You probably noticed something distinct about their social structure. They live fast and they die relatively young. Most female chimpanzees stop reproducing in their late 30s. They rarely survive more than a few years after that. Evolutionarily speaking, this makes perfect sense. Once a female can no longer pass on her genes, her biological mission is considered complete. Nature is ruthless about energy efficiency. There is no point in keeping a biological machine running if it cannot replicate its own code. But humans are a glaring, confusing, and beautiful exception to this rule. We are one of the only species on this planet that experiences menopause. We are one of the only species that lives for decades after we lose the ability to have children. Why would natural selection allow for a long period of life where an organism is essentially post-productive? For a long time, biologists were stumped. It seemed like a waste of resources. It seemed like a glitch in the code. But it turns out it is not a glitch at all. It is our greatest superpower. This is the grandmother hypothesis. It is the theory that explains why humans conquered the planet, and it starts with a simple reality about the human infant. Our babies are expensive. They are neurologically needy. They have massive brains that consume roughly 60% of their total energy intake during infancy. This puts an incredible amount of pressure on human mothers. If you look at our closest relatives, like the bonobos or the chimpanzees, their young become independent relatively quickly. They can forage for their own food as soon as they are weaned. But human children? They are essentially helpless for years. If a human mother had to provide for herself and her children entirely on her own, she could only afford to have a baby every 5 to 7 years. With those intervals, the human population would have never expanded. We would have remained a footnote in the evolutionary history of the great apes. Then, about 2 million years ago, the climate changed. The forests of Africa began to shrink. The lush, fruit-filled canopy disappeared and was replaced by vast, dry savannas. Food became scarce. The old strategies of gathering fruit were no longer enough to sustain our ancestors. Our ancestors had to switch to hard, fibrous tubers and seeds. These foods were difficult to dig up and even harder to chew. A young child, with their small hands and underdeveloped teeth, could not possibly survive on this diet alone. This is where the grandmother enters the picture. According to the research of anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, the arrival of postmenopausal women was the missing piece of the puzzle. When a grandmother was present in the social group, she provided what is now known as alloparenting. She didn't just sit around, she became a high-efficiency food machine. She spent her days digging for tubers that the younger children couldn't reach. She processed them, pounded them, and shared them. By taking on the burden of feeding the weaned children, the grandmothers allowed the mothers to shift their focus. Because the children were being fed by their elders, the mothers were free to conceive again much sooner. Instead of waiting 6 years between births, they could wait 3 or 4. This effectively doubled the reproductive rate of the human species. And in the world of evolution, speed is everything. But the influence of the grandmothers went beyond just caloric intake. Grandmothers were the living hard drives of the Stone Age. In a world without writing, without the internet, and without schools, knowledge was the only thing keeping you alive. A grandmother had lived through dozens of drought cycles. She knew exactly which roots were poisonous and which ones were medicine. She knew how to navigate the landscape during the seasonal migrations of prey. She knew the social hierarchies of the tribe. She was a walking, talking library. When a child learns from a peer, they learn a skill. When a child learns from a grandmother, they learn history. They learn how to survive events that occur only once every 10 or 20 years. This transmission of intergenerational knowledge is why humans were able to adapt to new environments so quickly. We didn't have to wait for our genes to mutate to deal with a new climate. We simply asked Grandma. There is another layer to this, too. It is the evolution of the human brain itself. Research into the cooperative breeding theory suggests that our massive, complex brains are a result of our social environment. To survive in a group where everyone is sharing, you need to be smart. You need to understand who to trust. You need to understand the social rules of the camp. You need to read the intentions of others. A child raised by a mother, a father, and a grandmother is exposed to a much wider array of personalities and social cues than a child raised in isolation. This complexity forced our brains to grow larger. We became smarter because we were more social, and we were more social because we had grandmothers to hold the group together. If you look at the skull of a Homo erectus from 1.8 million years ago, you see the beginnings of these shifts. But by the time we hit the era of Homo heidelbergensis, about 600,000 years ago, we see the survival rates of older individuals starting to climb. This is the exact moment when we see a massive explosion in brain size and cultural complexity. The two are inextricably linked. The longer lifespan provided the stability, and the stability provided the brain power. But let's talk about the cost. Why don't all animals do this? Why don't elephants, who also live a long time, rely on this same dynamic? The answer lies in the specific way humans interact with their environment. We are obligate scavengers and gatherers. Our food sources are hidden. They are not sitting on a tree branch waiting to be picked. To feed a human group, you need labor, you need tools, and you need a strategy. The grandmother is the anchor of that labor. There is a fascinating study from the Hadza people of Tanzania. The Hadza are one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth. Researchers tracked the daily activities of the tribe. They found that grandmothers were more productive than younger, non-parenting women, and even more productive than some of the men. They spent more hours in the field. They collected more calories, and crucially, they gave almost all of that energy to their grandchildren. In a very literal sense, the survival of the Hadza children is tied to the grandmother's knees and hands. We have a word for this today, the grandmother effect. It isn't just about feeding children, it is about the provisioning of the next generation. When grandmothers provide this buffer, they lower the risk of infant mortality. And when infant mortality drops, the pressure on the entire population changes. We become a society that invests in the long term rather than the short term. We become a species that values preparation over reaction. Think about the implications of this for modern society. We often view aging as a period of decline. We view the elderly as a burden on the economy or the healthcare system. But from an evolutionary standpoint, that is a catastrophic misunderstanding. We were designed by nature to be an intergenerational species. We are designed to have 3 generations living side by side. When we isolate the elderly in facilities or push them to the periphery of our lives, we are ignoring 2 million years of evolutionary programming. We are cutting off the source of our own stability. We are also looking at the impact of the grandmother effect on the development of language. To effectively teach and share wisdom, language had to become precise. It had to become more than just grunts and warnings. You cannot explain how to process a toxic plant using only gestures. You need complexity. You need grammar. You need to be able to talk about the past and the future. The grandmother's role as an educator was the primary engine that pushed language from simple signal calling into the sophisticated tool we use today. So, the next time you look at a family tree, Don't just see names and dates, see a survival mechanism. See a strategy that allowed a weak, slow, hairless ape to outlast every other hominid species on the planet. We are not just the children of our mothers, we are the legacy of our grandmothers. They were the ones who kept the fire burning when the night got cold. They were the ones who made sure that the next generation could afford to grow a brain that was too big, too slow, and too hungry to survive on its own. Consider the trade off. We traded speed for strategy. We traded raw strength for accumulated wisdom. We traded the ability to reproduce as fast as possible for the ability to provide as much as possible. It was a massive gamble. It meant that for thousands of years, our survival hinged on the kindness and the endurance of our elders. If they had failed to help, we would have gone extinct. If they hadn't lived long enough to pass on their knowledge, our brains would have remained small. This makes the existence of the grandmother the silent partner in every human invention, every painting, every tool, and every scientific breakthrough. She is there in the background, ensuring the next generation is fed, taught, and nurtured. She is the reason we are not just another primate. She is the reason we are human. But what happens when this cycle breaks? What happens when a species that evolved to live in intergenerational clusters starts living in nuclear bubbles? We are seeing the results today in the form of loneliness, mental health crises, and a disconnect from our own history. We have optimized our lives for individual convenience, but we have ignored the biological reality that we are a team sport. We need the elders, not just for their stories, but for the fundamental physiological support they provide to the youngest among us. The grandmother hypothesis serves as a reminder that we are not individualistic units meant to survive in isolation. We are nodes in a long, unbroken chain of care. Every person alive today is the descendant of a lineage that successfully utilized the grandmother. Your ancestors survived because there was an older woman who spent her days digging in the dirt so that your great-great-great-grandfather wouldn't starve. That is a heavy, beautiful responsibility. As we look toward the future, as we face challenges that are as complex as the changing climate our ancestors faced 2 million years ago, we should remember this lesson. Complexity requires cooperation. It requires the pooling of resources across ages. It requires the wisdom of the old to be integrated with the energy of the young. The story of the human grandmother is the story of the human success. It is the story of how we used time to our advantage. While other animals fought for dominance and speed, we fought for connection and continuity. We bet on the old to save the young, and the gamble paid off. So, what does this tell us about the future of our species? Perhaps that our survival doesn't depend on how much power we can generate or how fast we can innovate, but on how well we can hold our generations together. Evolution built us to be a bridge between the past and the future. As long as we keep that bridge intact, as long as we value the role of the elder, we will continue to adapt. But if we break that chain, we risk losing the very thing that made us human in the first place. Take a moment to think about your own path. Think about the knowledge that was passed down to you, the stories you were told, the lessons that were whispered to you when you were just a child. That wasn't just affection, that was 2 million years of evolutionary survival training. That was the grandmother hypothesis in action. It's a gift that keeps on giving, provided we remember to accept it. We are the only species that has found a way to make death a part of our survival strategy. By allowing our elders to live on, we created a culture that can survive the death of the individual. We are stronger than our biology. We are a species of shared experience. And as long as we hold on to that, we have a future. The question is, will we keep the chain strong, or will we forget the lessons that kept us alive when we were nothing more than foragers in the savannah? The answer is being written right now in how we choose to live together.